It finally happened yesterday. The number one residential solar installer in the country filed for bankruptcy. Of course, I'm talking about Freedom Forever. $500 million in debt, up to 100,000 creditors. Been under investigation by the Texas Attorney General, and still, they were the number one installer on last year's top solar contractors list. But honestly, most of us in the industry aren't too surprised that they're filing for bankruptcy. Stick with me. I want to break it down, what's going on in the industry, what I think it means for the future, why it might be a good thing, and what that means for you, whether you're a rep, a manager, or a business owner. So a few years ago, I was releasing videos like every single week, and I was saying it felt every single time I turned the camera on. One of the things that I was saying was the solar industry needs to grow up. The tactics were sloppy. The promises were outrageous. Companies were so exciting about the gold rush that we were in that they were just hiring anyone with a pulse and then sending them out door to door with a script and a prayer. And at the time, I got a lot of pushback. People said I was being negative. Maybe I was being a little too negative at times. But for the most part, I was just being honest. What I saw was an industry that was growing so fast, it didn't have any time to build any solid foundation. And I knew at some point the bill was going to come due. Now, I'll be honest with you, I was pretty naive about the timeline. Because back in 2022, when I was spewing like, oh, solar needs to grow up, people in solar industry need to grow up, I was thinking like, oh, we might grow up in the next 3 to 4 years. The bad actors would wash out and we would come out as a stronger industry. It's been a much slower and a much bloodier process than I ever expected. And we still have a long way to go. Freedom Forever, gone. Sunnova, gone. Original SunPower, gone. PosiGen, gone. Titan Solar, gone. Lumio, gone. Peak Energy, gone. ADT Solar, gone. In the year 2024, more than 100 solar companies filed for bankruptcy alone. And these weren't small companies. SunPower was founded in 1985. In 2021, it was valued at $9 billion. And 3 years later, it was sold in a bankruptcy court for $45 million. Sunnova had 500,000 customers, and yet they still had $8.9 billion in debt. And when they filed, they had $13.5 million in cash, and they were sold for $118 million. All of them ran the same playbooks, dealership model, third-party financing, grow as fast as possible with other people's money. And one by one, the math caught up to them. And I reviewed the bankruptcy documents from Freedom Forever, and I want to talk about specifically what happened here in Freedom Forever's case because I think it's important. And in the bankruptcy documents, Freedom Forever's biggest creditor was Mosaic Finance, and they owed them $114 million. And what was going on was Mosaic was advancing Freedom Forever a pretty large chunk of money on their future installations when deals closed. And so they were giving them a high percentage. And then with Freedom's operations being what I think operations are expected when you have a large nationwide installer, they had a lot of deals that fell through, and they had a lot of deals that took a long time. And as many of us in the industry know, a large chunk of those deals never made it to install, and the ones that did probably took a lot longer than expected. So what you have is you have Mosaic fronting massive amounts of cash for systems that probably weren't going to get installed, and Freedom running their business as if that money was good revenue. So eventually, Mosaic's books blew up. They filed for bankruptcy in June of 2025, and they stopped making the milestone payments to installers. And what that did was it cut off the cash that companies like Freedom Forever depended on to operate. So when Mosaic went down, it resulted in this cascading effect across the entire industry. And Freedom Forever was probably the biggest domino to fall because of that. You're talking about a company that had installed over 2 gigawatts of solar across 35 states and had over 3,600 employees. Like many of the companies that came before them, they tried to grow their way out of trouble. For example, acquiring Meraki in 2024. And many of us know that they had a messy legal battle with Sunder Energy. A couple of years ago, Sunder was one of, if not their biggest super dealer. And Sunder decided they wanted to split from the company. And during that split, that's very well documented that it was a messy separation. And Freedom actually poached hundreds of sales reps and leadership in that transition. And as I briefly mentioned earlier, the Texas Attorney General also opened a consumer protection investigation into their contract practices. And then yesterday, they filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy with $1 billion in debt and up to 100,000 creditors. And so that's not a company that got unlucky. That's a company that fell victim to a bad business model that most of the nationwide installers have fell victim to in the last few years. And even just 3 months ago on Freedom Forever's own podcast, Brett Bushy was calling 2026 the year of opportunity in solar. He talked about targeting $2 billion in revenue, 50% market share, a massive new deal with Tesla. They rolled out a new hybrid financing product called Aura, which was supposed to be a game changer. And he literally said this is the time to 10x down, to 20x down. And if people aren't able to do that, then they can't handle this industry. And 90 days later, he's filing for bankruptcy. And if you watch that same podcast, you can actually see Brett mentioning that Mosaic's downfall caused havoc for Freedom Forever. And then obviously with the tax credit, they had to pull out of a lot of states where the economics just weren't going to make sense anymore. And he did predict, rightfully, that 2026 was going to be the third straight year of solar market contraction because he knew this was coming. This isn't something that Freedom just woke up one day and realized, like, oh no, we're in trouble. This is something that's been building for quite a long time, and they've been trying to just continuously grow their way out of it. And if you want to know like how contracted the industry is right now, SolarCon is actually not even happening this year. And we're talking about the biggest residential solar sales conference in the country, but it's also the fact that it's not happening this year isn't too surprising, considering last year it seemed like the conference was only saved because Forever actually stepped up as a last-minute sponsor. So now, just 12 months later, Freedom Forever is filing for bankruptcy. SolarCon isn't happening, and that kind of tells you everything that you need to know about the old guard and like the old way of doing things in our industry. The shakeout isn't coming; it's here. Actually, it's probably been here, and it's a lot bigger than most of us anticipated. And now, before I move on and talk about more about this, I think there is something that has to be said. I've always believed that solar was one of the more complicated home service industries. When you have different states and different regulations and different utility companies and different permitting and different incentives, being successful at scale across multiple states is an insane challenge. And I really don't think that a lot of people understand or appreciate how hard of a challenge that is. So when I look at Freedom Forever and with those other companies, I'm not really surprised that they failed. But while I'm not surprised that they failed, it doesn't mean that I'm happy about it. I've been watching reaction to the news online today in Facebook groups and social media, and everyone has something to say, of course. But one of the things that I'm seeing is I'm seeing a lot of people that are cheering, a lot of people that have been waiting for this day. And I get it. Freedom Forever had a lot of problems. They took a lot of shortcuts. They made a lot of enemies, or a lot of people have worked with them and had a bad experience. But still, celebrating a company in our industry going bankrupt is wrong. Because yes, Freedom Forever did hurt a lot of businesses when they were around, but also this filing of bankruptcy is going to hurt many more. And a lot of people lost their jobs. Over 3,600 employees that now don't know where their next paycheck is going to come from. And every time this happens, every time one of these big companies goes down, it makes our job harder because more and more homeowners are going to look at this and read this and are aware of the problems in our industry, and it gives them less reason to consider going solar. So just like we should be wishing for companies to be better, we shouldn't be wishing for them to fail. Raise the bar, don't cheer when someone trips over it. Because every time a company like this fails, it makes our conversations in the future harder and more difficult. And now, as I shift my focus away from Freedom Forever, shifting our focus to what the industry is now and what the future looks like. And as all of us know, but maybe some of us still are processing, the 30% solar tax credit is gone, it's dead, it was killed by the one big beautiful bill. And so if a homeowner buys a solar system in 2026 with cash or loan, they get $0 from the federal government. And that incentive or incentives like that have pretty much driven this industry for the last few decades. Obviously, we're a third of the way through 2026. We don't have the exact numbers yet, but it seems like people expect we might see another 20% drop on top of that 30% drop that we saw a couple of years ago. The only current path to incentives for residential solar is through third-party ownership, aka leases and PPA. And even that commercial investment tax credit is only available if the project begins construction before July of this year. So that is a very short runway, and in a way, it changes the entire way that solar is sold. Because the old pitch of go solar, claim the tax credit, have the system pay for itself in 6 years doesn't really apply anymore in 2020. And so right now, what everyone's doing is trying to figure out how to sell solar without that crutch. And the companies that do figure it out are going to be the ones that are here to stay and the ones that thrive. And the ones that aren't able to adapt are probably going to fall by the wayside. And something else that's happening more now than ever in the past is that solar is local again. So here's what's actually happening at the ground level. Is, as we've already mentioned, the national mega installers, the private equity backed roll-ups, companies that were trying to cover 40 states, most of them are not here anymore. And so what that means for the rest of us is that solar is local again. And solar being local again is a very good thing because local and regional companies, they're able to move faster, they know their markets, they can build real relationships with customers instead of just focused on maximizing the amount of transactions. So if you're a local and a regional operator, you're in a better position now to compete, and you have more advantages now than you did a few years ago. Yeah, the size of the industry, the pie, is a lot smaller than it was a few years ago, but your ability to get a bigger chunk of it might be easier now. Once again, refocus, and let's talk about what is the difference between companies that are growing versus companies that are just surviving. And this is even more true now that tax credits are officially gone, but I'm talking about cross-selling. And that's because the cost to acquire a solar customer is higher than it's ever been before. If we're talking about Facebook, if we're talking about Google ads, if we're talking about YouTube ads, if we're talking about TikTok ads, anything online, that's my area. It's more expensive than it's ever been before. People are less likely to be interested in solar. People are less likely to talk to a door knocker at their door. It's much harder now to acquire a solar customer than it was. And of course, with the 30% tax credit gone, margins are significantly less. And so if solar is the only thing you're selling, the only thing that you have to offer your customer in the future, you are leaving money on the table. From my own experiences, I've been running advertising campaigns online for the solar industry for 7+ years now. It is harder now to get someone to opt in for solar than it's ever been. But here's what they do want, because they still want batteries, they want energy independence, they want backup power, and they might want solar if they can bundle it with a roof and it makes the whole project make better financial sense. Even more now than ever, they're interested in the outcome more than the actual panel on the roof. So solar is a vessel to bring homeowners what they want, which is lower bills, more energy independence, and a roof that doesn't leak. The companies that understand this and position solar as part of a bigger solution, they're going to be the ones that are closing deals. And the companies that are winning right now, they're selling roofing, HVAC, battery storage, and solar, and they're thinking about the customer's lifetime value rather than just one single transaction. If you're a rep, this is your opportunity to increase your average ticket and your income. And if you're an owner, this is how you build a business that can weather the ups and the downs that come with being reliant on one single vertical. Solar is seasonal. It goes through cycles more than anything else. You don't see that with roofing or HVAC. And the local and regional companies that figure this out are the ones that are still standing strong. You and your company's reputation is everything right now, because homeowners in 2026 are more skeptical than ever before. And honestly, I don't see how we could blame them. The number one solar installation company in the country just filed for bankruptcy, and you have tens of thousands of customers that are wondering what's going to happen with their system, who's going to honor their warranty, etc. And once again, it isn't new. When SunPower went down, they shut off customers' apps, their web portals, their phones. So homeowners that are paying attention have seen this play out over and over again. They've heard the horror stories, they've seen the social media posts, they've watched the YouTube videos, they've seen the news segments. And because of that, they are much more likely to be Googling you before they ever pick up the phone. They're reading your reviews, they're going on Reddit, they're asking other homeowners about their experiences, they're looking you up on the Better Business Bureau. And so if you're a rep and you're thinking about where to work, this should be your number one criteria. Don't just chase the lowest red line or the highest commission split. Actually look at the company that you're talking to and ask yourself, does this company make it easier for me to sell or harder for me to sell? Because I promise you, it's a lot easier to close a homeowner who is already familiar with your company's reputation versus a homeowner who has just read about Freedom Forever closing down. And if you're a business owner, this is where your energy should be. So build a reputation, earn the reviews, do the work that makes people want to refer you, because that's an asset that compounds over time, and it's something that no one will ever be able to take away from you. And so here's where I land on all this, is that 5 years ago, I talked about how the industry needed to grow up. I meant it then, and I stand by it now. But I believe that we're seeing the other side of this as a healthier industry, an industry where the companies that build something real are rewarded for it, because the tax credit is gone, the mega installers are gone, the easy money is gone. And what's left are the companies that actually know how to run a business, who care about serving their customers, and are here to build something that lasts. Because if you're still in this industry, you survived something that a lot of people didn't. Now, the question we all have to ask ourselves is, what is it that we're going to do with this opportunity in front of us? So if you found this valuable, or you want to add something, or you think I'm wrong, go ahead, drop a comment down below. Or if you're just surprised to see me for the first time in a while, feel free to give me a shout too. And just in case you haven't, go ahead and press that subscribe button, because I'm getting back to putting out content regularly that helps solar and other home service businesses grow. And I'll see you in the next one.